Hi guys! In this video I'm going to show you the main types of factoring. I have 7 different problems written out and I'm going to teach this to you checklist style so that when you're doing your own homework problems you can use this to know which type of factoring that you could do on each of your own problems. So the very first type of factoring which you should check for in all of your problems first is GCF, which stands for greatest common factor. Even if your problem ends up having other factoring, you should always take out a greatest common factor first if there is one. So in this problem, I know that the GCF is 2x squared, and that's because that's the greatest thing that I could divide out of both terms evenly. And some people like to write the work, just to show the work, that they're actually going to divide out 2x squared from each term like that. That's optional, you don't have to write that. But the actual factoring then is going to be 2x squared written on the outside and then a parenthesis. And then when I do the dividing for this term, that gives me 2x squared plus, and then when I do the dividing for that term, it gives me 1. Now, a really common mistake is that people right here, instead of putting a 1, they sometimes think that that's 0. But you have to remember that when you divide something by itself, it equals 1 and not 0. It doesn't just go away. So this is, I'm just going to write, don't accidentally put 0. Okay, so this is the answer to our first problem. Now, moving on to the easy quadratics. These are the types where you want to find two numbers that would multiply to negative 24. So multiply to negative 24. And at the same time, those numbers need to add to 10. So now the first thing that comes to mind might be 6 and 4, but there's no way to get those to multiply to negative 24 and at the same add up to positive 10. So the two numbers that actually work for this are 2 and 12. And I could use negative 2 and positive 12 because negative 2 times 12 is negative 24 and negative 2 plus 12 is positive 10. So then you basically just write the answers. It'll be x minus 2 times x plus 12. And then you're done with that one. So that's the easier type of quadratics. Now the harder quadratics are harder because they have this number in front. And you can't take the number out because it's not a GCF. So it's just kind of stuck there in your way. So the way that I do these, it's called splitting the middle term, which you might have heard of. So the first step is to take the 3 and the 10 and multiply them together. 3 times 10 is 30. So now what we're doing, kind of similar, but we need to multiply to 30 and add to 11. And we just have to think of two numbers that do that, which would be 6 and 5. So 6 and 5 are the two key numbers that we need. Now, the reason that they call this splitting the middle term is because we recopy 3x squared, but then instead of 10x, or instead of 11x, we split that up into the two numbers that we decided on, which is 6x plus 5x. And then the last number, we just recopy that, so that's plus 10. Okay, so now the next step that you want to do is to group. We have 4 things written down, so we're going to group now. So that means we do a parenthesis around the first 2 and a parenthesis around the second 2. And now, out of each of those, we're going to take out the GCF. So this is nothing brand new. you can think of what we did in our first problem. So from this parenthesis, the GCF would be 3x. So I'm going to take out the 3x, and that leaves me with x plus 2. And then out of this parenthesis, the GCF is just a 5, a positive 5. So I can write plus 5 and take it out, and that gives me x plus 2. Now you'll notice this right here and this are the same. That's not a coincidence. That is definitely what should have happened. So then we're ready to rewrite our final answer, which means we just take the 3x and the plus 5 and we put them together. So 3x plus 5, and then the x plus 2, we just write it down only once. You don't have to write it twice. That would actually be wrong to write it twice. And then that's our final answer. So I'll just write over here, rewrite final answer. Now there are many other different ways to do these harder quadratics. There's also just guess and check. And I've even had students tell me about magic X's and magic boxes. So there's a lot of different ways to do the harder quadratics, but this is the way that I always do it, and I recommend it for most people. So now moving on. Our fourth type of factoring is differences of squares. The thing to notice and to realize if it's this type is that there's only two terms and they're separated by a minus sign. So I'll just put here, look for ones with only two terms, because that's a good, like a red flag that it'll probably be this kind. So what we do is we take the square roots of each number. So 25x squared, the square root of that is 5x, and that's going to go there and there. And then the square root of 36 is 6, so that's going to go there and there. And we just make 1 plus and 1 minus, and you're done. So not only would they only have two terms, but you'd also be able to take the square roots of the numbers perfectly. So look for ones with only two terms and with perfect square roots. Now, let's compare that to number 5, the sums and differences of cubes. It's kind of the same thing as number 4, but now we're going to be able to take the cube roots of the numbers. The first thing to do is we're going to have one short parenthesis and one longer parenthesis for each of these. Let's just separate these here. In the first parenthesis, we're going to put the cube roots. So the cube root of 8x cubed is 2x. The cube root of 27 is 3. Okay, and then what we're going to put in the next parenthesis is I'm going to take the 2x and square it. So that's going to be 4x squared. And I'm just leaving spaces between the numbers on purpose. We'll go back through and fill in with plus and minuses. The next number, so I'll just write a note here, the 4x squared is because we did 2x squared. Now, the next number is going to just be taking 2x times the 3. So that gives us 6x. So that's from doing 2x times the 3. And then the final number is taking the 3 and squaring it. So that would be a 9. So it kind of has like a symmetry to it. We square, so we square the first number, then we multiply these two together, and then we square the 3, which is the last number. Now, the way, an easy little trick to remembering the pluses and minuses, some people call it SOAP, S-O-A-P. It stands for same, opposite, always positive. So the same sign, which would be a minus, the opposite sign, which would be a plus, and then always positive. And then you are done. So let's try that same pattern with this other problem that I wrote. So in the first smaller parenthesis, we put the cube roots. So of 64x cubed, the cube root is 4x. The cube root of 1 is 1. Now I have my longer parenthesis. So I square the 4x, so 16x squared. Now I multiply the 4x with the 1, so that gives me 4x. Then I square the 1, which gives me 1. And then I go back through and use that little soap trick. So same sign as the original, so a positive, opposite sign of the original, so minus, and then always positive. We're talking about same sign as this, the original problem. And that's the answer. Now, let's move on to number 6, which is grouping. This is like the second half of that splitting the middle term that I did on the other page on problem number 3. So grouping, the key feature of that is that there's 4 terms. So what we do is we immediately go like this and then group those together. Keep the negative with the 9. Don't separate those from each other. And then we take out the GCF from both parentheses. So the GCF of 4x cubed plus 12x squared is 4x squared. So that leaves me with x plus 3. The GCF of this, negative 9x and negative 27, is negative 9. And that also leaves me with x plus 3. So now when I rewrite my answer, remember from the other page, I put these two things together. So that's 4x squared minus 9 times x plus 3. And I did this on purpose, but 4x squared minus 9, that's the difference of squares like we did in problem 4. So this breaks down even further to 2x plus 3 times 2x minus 3 because we take the square roots. And then you also need to recopy the x plus 3. It doesn't go anywhere, so it's still there. And that's that answer. And then this final problem, I call it a combo problem because it just has 2 types of factoring that you have to go through. The first thing is the GCF. So I notice that there's a GCF of 2x. So when I take that out first, I'm left with x squared plus 7x minus 18. Now, it's the easy kind of quadratic. So I need to multiply to negative 18 and add to 7. So then I know that positive 9 and negative 2 will accomplish this. So that's going to break into x plus 9 times x minus 2. And, very important, recopy the GCF right back in the front of your answer, and that is your answer. So just be on the lookout all the time for GCF, and then look through your problem and see which of these other types it might be, and hopefully that will help you get through all of these pretty confusing factoring problems.